Good morning. I'm Corley Ellis. I'm a 1997 graduate of Leadership, Shelby County. I'm also serve in the House of Representatives for District 41, which covers the southeast part of Shelby County. It is a pleasure to be here with you under these abnormal circumstances. I would like to take the opportunity to say that in 1997, when I went through Leadership, Shelby County, that was well before my political career had started. Leadership, Shelby County taught me a lot about the inner workings of the county, the things that we celebrate, the good things we've got going on, the quality of life and such, but it also taught me a lot about the struggles and the things we've got to work on. But more importantly than that, Leadership, Shelby County let me foster and make friendships and relationships that I still enjoy to this day, both politically, but more importantly, personal relationships that I would not have fostered otherwise. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Okay, so today, Carol had asked that we cover some of the, what the session is going to look like, the legislative session this year, the logistics of it. And it's going to be an interesting session, and that's very fluid. I can tell you what I think it's going to look like now. If you remember, last session, we had started the session and made it about halfway through. So there's going to be a pile of bills that didn't get passed last session, and then you put that with the bills that will be introduced this session. And so it's going to be a hectic, very busy session. With COVID, there'll be extra safety protocols put into place. Some of them obvious. We will, of course, be required to wear a mask when we're in the State House. Anybody that comes into the State House will be required to wear a mask. Temperatures will be taken, my understanding is through a thermal imaging through when they walk in the door. Anybody with a fever will be turned away. There will be very limited access to the State House and movement throughout the State House. So legislators, we're being encouraged to, just like we were when we finished the legislative session, if you remember, we went back for a few days just to pass the education budget and the general fund budget. So we were asked to report to our office and stay there as much as possible and not move a lot. So there'll be limited access and movement. There'll be increased sanitation in the State House, and not just sanitation stations, but we have bought an electrostatic sanitation device way over my head, but my understanding is that it'll be used in every room when the room is vacated, and it will sterilize not just the surface of things, but also underneath things. So there'll be increased sanitation. Normally, as Senator Ward could tell you, most of the negotiations and real work on bills are done on committee days. There's a host of committee rooms. There's several of them, more than I know. We're going to limit that to 5 committee rooms in the House of Representatives, and here's why it's twofold. One, there's only 5 committee rooms that are large enough to where we feel comfortable with social distancing, and then we'll be able to maintain a good social distancing among the members. But 2, with that limited access and movement throughout the building, we feel very strongly that we've got to be completely transparent. And so those 5 committee rooms are the only ones that have the capabilities to do live stream video and audio. So we'll use those 5 conference rooms. Now, committee rooms, excuse me. When you look at the 2 bodies, the Senate upstairs that Senator Ward will tell you a little bit about in a minute, there's 35 members in a room. You go 2 floors down and we have 105 members in the same size room. So logistically, obviously it's going to be a lot more difficult for us to maintain that social distancing. So what we're proposing now, and again, this is fluid, this is moving, changing every day. But right now, we're thinking that we will have 58 members actually in the chambers. There's a gallery up top that the public normally uses. We'll put 34 members in the gallery. And then just outside of the gallery, there's 2 rooms, room 602 and 603, and we'll put 6 members in one of those, 7 in another, and there's our 105. We will be voting via tablet. Normally we vote at our desk in the chambers via machine. We've ordered a very nice, it's got to be nice for what we're paying for it, software program where we will vote from tablets. Logistically, when you separate everybody, my concern is that I think we can overcome. That is when a member in room 602 wants to discuss an issue or debate an issue that we're voting on, they will raise their hand by a touch of a button, then they will be recognized, then they've got to either come to the chambers or a microphone somewhere to do that debate. They'll have 10 minutes to debate, but then the logistics of how do they get to the mic, where do they get with the limited movement. So there's concern there that I think it will make it issues that would normally go by pretty quick, I think we will end up spending a lot of time on. I think our session, the whole entire session will be more like it is at the end of the session when it's very hectic, long hours, long days. I think it's going to be like that during the whole session. Let me take a minute just to tell you a little bit about the state of the education budget amidst this pandemic, COVID pandemic. I do sit on the Education Ways and Means Committee, and I'm honored to do so. But I will tell you that it's good news. I've got good news today. I'm not always a bearer of good news, but today it's good news. The 2020, fiscal year 2020 budget that we just ended, revenues were up 2.9%. That's with about 8 months of COVID. So the fact that we're not down, I'm celebrating. To break that down just a little bit, well, first let me tell you that's $209 million extra dollars that came in that we didn't allocate. So to break that down to show you the pre-COVID numbers, the months leading up until COVID hit, the revenues were up 7.54%. Post-COVID, once COVID hit, that last 7 or 8 months or so, revenues were down 1.06%. I celebrate that number as much as anything. To only be down that 1.06, we were all expecting a little bit, not a little bit, but a fair amount worse than that. So I celebrate that as well. We budgeted for the fiscal year we just started, the education budget was a $7.2 billion with a B, $7.2 billion budget. I'm extremely optimistic that we'll be able to hit those revenue projections just based on with 8 months of COVID, we brought in $7.4 billion. So we've still got room to lose. Plus, I'm very proud of the legislature, and this was done before I got there. Senator Ward can take some credit for it, but I cannot. And it's by far the best thing your legislature has ever done for the school kids of the state of Alabama, and that's they passed the Rolling Reserve Act. And what that does is, during the good times, that $209 extra million we've got this year, and instead of allocating all that out this next year, a portion of that is put back into a budget stabilization fund in case of a hard time, in case we don't meet revenues projections, we can dip into that and not go into proration. Prior to the passage of that Rolling Reserve Act, the state of Alabama, it was very common practice to go into proration. Of course, proration is when you don't meet revenue projections and you say, hey, schools, we've got to take an extra $200 million off the budget we've already given you. So obviously very problematic. That was a common practice. Since the passage of that bill, I'm proud to say the state has not gone into proration since then. Now, so that $209 million extra dollars, a portion of that will go into the budget stabilization fund, and then a portion of it, the vast majority of it goes into the advancement in technology fund. There's $372 million in the budget stabilization fund. So if we don't meet the revenue projections that I think we will, if we don't, we've got that fund to dip into before we have to go into proration. The advancement in technology fund, the money there gets prorated out most of it every year. And your superintendents love it because it's found money. It's money they weren't expecting. You can ask Lewis Brooks. I promise you he loves this fund. That fund is up to $499.6 million. And so we will allocate through supplemental appropriations this session the vast majority of that. It can be used for obviously advancement in technology, but we did pass a law a few years ago when school safety was a hot topic, and you can use that now for school safety. So there's some good things happening. To summarize, education budget, we're in good shape. I think we'll continue to be in good shape, but we've got that safety net of the Budget Stabilization Act. Thank you to our legislature for that. And logistically, COVID, we're going to deal with it. We're going to be fine, and we're going to be safe, and we're going to go do the business of the state of Alabama.
Hi, I'm Cam Ward. I'm glad to be back here with you. I'm State Senator for District 14, which is Shelby, Bibb, and Chilton County. I was a member of leadership Shelby County class of 1999. And that happened to be 2 years before I was elected to the House of Representatives. I will say one thing about leadership Shelby County. Through my time in the legislature and the chance to serve the people of Shelby County, I learned more through that class, the people I went with, the classes I went through. I learned more about healthcare, our history, our state of government than anything else could have ever taught me in leadership Shelby County. It gave me a great motivation, but also a building block to understanding my community better. And like Corley, I will tell you, you couldn't find a better organization to be involved with to learn more about our county than leadership Shelby County. We are definitely in some uncertain times, as Corley mentioned. COVID-19 changed everything. Typically, the legislative session over a 4-year period, your first year is kind of an introduction period. Your fourth year is typically a re-election period where both those years very little is done. The second and third year tend to be your most productive. Unfortunately, COVID-19 kind of upended all that. We started off the second year with a large number of bills introduced in both the House and the Senate, a lot of issues we had to take on. COVID-19 cut that short, requiring us to go home early and just passing the budgets. That means the third year, the quadrennium coming up in 2021 is going to probably be one of the heaviest legislative sessions, assuming COVID-19 allows us to do that. It's going to create a huge backlog of bills, and there's a lot of issues to address. But as Corley also mentioned, it's going to create some logistical problems. The State House of Alabama, when the Alabama legislature moved in there in 1986, the building used to be owned by the Highway Department, and that's what it was for. We were supposed to move in there temporarily, and we've been there ever since. But it's not very conducive to allow large public gatherings. That's created a huge problem for both the House and the Senate, particularly the House with 105 members. I've had a lot of people back home in Shelby County ask me, they said, well, why can't you just do it digitally? Why can't you do it by technology? Well, first of all, the Constitution of Alabama says both the House and Senate, when they meet, they must meet with open doors, and they must meet in the seat of government in Montgomery. So we have to meet in Montgomery, both House and Senate. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we have to meet in the Capitol or in the State House. It just means we have to meet there. So that's a question I get asked quite a bit. It's still going to be a logistical problem that we have to work through. Second, people don't realize if the House and Senate meet in two different places, say the House were to meet at the Coliseum or a hotel and the Senate meet in the legislature, anytime a bill's passed or an amendment's adopted that has to go from one chamber to the other, that means someone has to literally physically carry that bill or carry that amendment to the other chamber where they're meeting at. So it just creates a lot of problems that COVID-19 brought on that we never really thought about. Budget-wise, I will say, when we left this last session, the greatest fear was we were going to have a huge budget shortfall. Corey mentioned earlier the $7.2 billion education budget, which thankfully has withheld the crisis of COVID. But the general fund budget, which is in Alabama, 80% of all your taxes goes to the education budget, the $7.2 billion, and then the other 20% pays for the general fund. General fund budget at $2.2 billion actually had 6 to 7% growth during COVID-19. It's the only time in state history where the general fund has actually had a higher percentage of growth than the education budget. It's still the smaller budget of the two, but it still had a high growth. And the reason for that was because the legislature several years ago, before the Supreme Court allowed for online sales tax collections, the legislature actually passed a bill that said, if we ever are allowed to collect online sales, a large portion of that would go to the general fund budget. That has really saved our general fund budget. Alabama is one of 6 states in the country that is not going to face a budget shortfall in 2021, but it was because of pretty smart budget moves during the last 10 years. We still have some challenges ahead of us. Medicaid, which is part of our general fund, $756 million. still got to be paid for out of the general fund. You have a corrections budget that's going to be roughly approaching $600 million, both huge items that are going to continue to grow, but our budget's stable. And I think that's the good news. Some of the not so good news, we have a lot of issues left on the table that people have to deal with. One, going forward, there's a big issue regarding what they call COVID liability. So there's been a big concern about lawsuits around the country where people are going into a business, wanting to shop, the retail office is open, they go in to shop, and suddenly they contract COVID. And then class action lawsuits are being filed against businesses, particularly small businesses. Many members of our local chambers deal with this all the time, where someone came in and they got COVID, and now all of a sudden they're suing you, blaming you for them getting COVID. And they're getting pretty hefty verdicts. There's legislation out there that would limit those frivolous lawsuits. I think that's very important. You're going to have to get right back to that when we go back into session in February. Second, another issue that's got to be dealt with is there were several economic incentive package bills that were set to expire, and they did expire in September. Those bills had to be renewed, or several economic incentive packages that we have out there for new companies and businesses coming in will cease to exist. Those are some important issues coming up. The budgets, limited liability, economic incentives, you have to deal with those. And then on top of that, in this next session, which is equally as challenging, is you still have the issues, what I call them the Groundhog Day bills. They come back year after year. You're still going to have a corrections problem that you have to deal with the federal government breathing down our neck. We're always going to have new issues with regard to technology in schools. We're going to have issues with Medicaid. When you have a large number of unemployment, when you have an increase in unemployment, people not working, Medicaid costs increase. We have to replenish our fund for unemployment. Our unemployment fund, we had a pretty good reserve until COVID hit, and now we've just about depleted that fund. We're going to have to deal with that so people who are out of work, who are trying to get back to work, have a bridge to help them get back to work. Those are all big challenges going forward. I am glad to say, I think when we reached April, probably in the legislature, a lot of us got really scared because we were thinking, are we about to have an economic bottom out? And for a while there, when unemployment got into double digits again, I think that fear was founded. But now looking at the budgets, looking at some of the issues we have going forward, we don't have it nearly as challenging as many of our friends and colleagues in other states around us. That's a good thing. If there's a dark cloud, I think the dark cloud would still be the uncertainty. None of us know what COVID is going to do to 2021. All of us keep thinking, well, we survived 2020. Surely it can't get any worse, but the statistics around the state and country show otherwise. So I think that uncertainty is going to create a lot of skittishness with the legislatures as far as how they fund the budgets going forward. Are they willing to increase funding for programs, or are they going to put more money back into reserves? The general fund budget now has a reserve. The Rolling Reserve Act that Corley mentioned, that reserve. Do we continue to kind of play it safe to make sure that COVID-19, if it continues to rear its ugly head, it doesn't drag us under as a state? And so those are some concerns we're going to have to deal with. Locally and legislative delegation-wise, I've been very fortunate to be chairman of the Senate delegation here for Shelby County for the last several years. Representative Mooney is going to be the chairman of the House delegation going forward. I think we have a delegation, both Senate and House members, that get along really well, mainly because everybody kind of has their specialty. We're not kind of locked into one area. Of the members in our delegation, you have real estate agents, you have law enforcement, you have former educators, you have attorneys like myself, you have healthcare professionals. So I think the diversity in our delegation is going to help quite a bit. That's always been a plus for Shelby County. And unlike some of our neighbors, I won't say which ones to the north of us in Jefferson County, we actually are blessed in that we all get along very well. We talk with each other. We tend to handle our disputes, get it settled before we ever do anything public. So that way, we are always making Shelby County proud as to how we act and carry ourselves in the business of the legislature. Finally, I would say this, the legislature, it's peculiar in that you always have the issues coming up, such as the budgets. You always know you're going to have COVID relief issues, anything like that you typically can see on the horizon. It's always the unknown issue that we don't know about that's coming that can kind of stumble you up. That's part of the legislative process. The blessing of Shelby County is the connections that we all have and work with to build relationships with the other legislators around the state, I think puts us in a prime position, not only for growth of our business community, but also the growth of our education community and the growth of our infrastructure and everything else we have in Shelby County. You go to other counties in the state, even prosperous ones like Baldwin County, they will tell you as their delegations fight among themselves and debate among legislation in pretty rough ways that oftentimes we're kind of the envy of the rest of the state. It's not because we're the smartest or the best, but it's because we actually know that working together, we can move our county forward, and we're not always stuck in place by fighting over petty issues. I really have enjoyed representing you in Senate District 14 and just look forward to doing anything I can to help this delegation as we go forward.
Again, thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure to be here with you today. And if there's ever anything we can do for you guys, I guess call me, right, Ken?
You call Corley, that's right.
And he's got some news.
Thank you for having us. I know normally we'd speak in person. Instead, we're online or doing it by video, and we appreciate the opportunity. This is my last interview and last speech as a state senator. I'm moving on to become State Director of Pardon and Parole. I've enjoyed serving the people of Shelby County for so long. For the last 19 years, I've been your legislator, and it's been an honor and privilege, and I look forward to doing anything I can to help you and help people like Corley Ellis continue doing the good job they're doing. So thanks again for having us today.